43 feet of predator, longer than a school bus. Twice the length of the largest great white shark alive in the ocean today. A skull over 5 feet long. Teeth with serrated edges, like steak knives. And at the tip of the snout, a blunt, bony ram, built to be driven into something. For 150 years. We called this animal by the wrong name. 80 million years ago, North America was cut in half, not by a mountain range, by an ocean. A warm, shallow sea reached from the Arctic all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico, and for tens of millions of years it drowned the middle of the continent. Kansas was open water. Texas was open water. Dallas sat under a few hundred feet of it. Scientists call it the Western Interior Seaway. And it had a king. He was not a dinosaur. That distinction matters more than most people realize. Dinosaurs walked the shorelines of this sea and occasionally washed into it, but they did not rule it. The animal that ruled it was a lizard. A true lizard, closer in family to a monitor lizard or a snake than to anything with claws and feathers. His ancestors had legs. They walked on land. Then, somewhere in the middle of the Cretaceous, they went back into the water and never came out. What came out the other side of that experiment was a Mosasaur. And the largest Mosasaur in that sea was a genus called Tylosaurus, the knob lizard, named for that strange bony ram on the front of its face. For over a century, the biggest Tylosaurus skeletons ever pulled out of American rock all carried one label, one species name. Written on the drawer, printed in the papers, repeated in every textbook. That label was wrong. And the man who first noticed it was wrong wrote it down in the 1960s, in a letter, and then said nothing more about it for the rest of his life. We will come back to that letter. To understand the animal, you have to understand the water. The Western Interior Seaway was not deep. 2,500 feet at the very deepest, and far shallower than that across most of its width. Sunlight reached the bottom in enormous stretches of it. It was warm. It was calm. 2,000 miles north to south, 600 miles across, and underneath all of it, the floor was white, not sand. Chalk. This sea was so productive that microscopic algae bloomed by the trillion, died, and rained down in a slow, endless snowfall of calcium plates. Layer on layer, for millions of years, until the floor of that ocean was a soft, pale sheet hundreds of feet thick. Now, put the life back into it. Ammonites. Coiled, ridged, the size of truck tires, hanging motionless in the midwater with their tentacles trailing beneath them. Squid pulsing past in the half-light. Below that, the shoals. Bony fish in numbers that darkened the water underneath them, turning as one body, breaking apart, reforming, and moving through the shoals, the things that ate them. Simolichthes, needle-toothed and silver. Xyphoctonus, 17 feet of fangs and permanent rage. A fish that swallowed prey whole and did it badly. We have found Xyphoctonus skeletons with an entire 6-foot fish still intact inside the ribcage, killed by the meal it could not digest. Sharks worked the same water. Squalocorax, blunt-nosed and unhurried, the scavenger whose tooth marks show up on almost everything that died out here. Above them, plesiosaurs. Bodies like barrels, 4 long paddles, and a neck that went out ahead of them like a fishing rod with a mouth on the end. And up at the surface, the diving birds. Hesperornis, 5 feet long, wings shrunk down to almost nothing, teeth still set in its beak. It could not fly. It swam like a loon, dove for fish, and every time it went under, it was gambling. Sea turtles the size of small cars grazed the pale floor. And 1,000 feet above all of it, pterosaurs with 20-foot wingspans tracked the shoals from the air. One of the richest marine ecosystems this continent has ever hosted, and every animal in it lived under the same shadow. Because in a sea that shallow, there is nowhere to go, no abyss to sink into, no cold deep to hide in. The bottom is right there, lit and bare and white. When something 40 feet long comes at you out of the blue, your only option is speed. And almost nothing in that sea was faster. Look at a Mosasaur and you can see the compromise written into every bone. The body is a lizard's body. Long, low, with a spine that keeps running past the hips into a tail longer than everything in front of it. But the limbs are wrong. The arm bones have shortened into stubs. The fingers have gone long and flat and stayed inside the skin, webbed into paddles that steer and brake and do almost nothing to push. Nothing about a Mosasaur pushes except the tail. And that tail did not end the way it was drawn for 100 years. Soft tissue from a close relative showed something nobody expected. A fluke. A downturned blade of flesh, shaped like a shark's, but inverted. These animals were not eels. They were built like sharks by something that was not remotely a shark. Now go to the head. That is where it gets strange. The lower jaw is not one solid piece. There is an extra joint partway along each side of it, a hinge halfway down the jaw, and it let the entire lower half of the face flex outward as the animal swallowed. On the roof of the mouth sits a second set of teeth. Pterygoid teeth, curved backward, doing nothing to cut and everything to hold. Watch what that actually means. Prey goes in. The jaws open for a fraction of a second to reposition. And instead of escaping, the animal gets dragged another few inches backward by the hooks in the palate. Then again. And again. It goes down in stages, alive, ratcheted into the throat by the roof of a mouth. This is a snake's architecture, scaled up to the length of a bus. And then, at the very front of the skull, the knob. A blunt, toothless cylinder of solid bone projecting out past the front teeth. That structure is what gave the genus its name. It is also almost certainly a weapon. Driven by a neck carrying some of the heaviest muscle attachments in the entire animal. Some of what we know is unnervingly specific. Skin from one Tylosaurus species still held traces of eumelanin, the pigment itself. These animals were dark. Not the pale sea monster green of old paintings, but dark on top, the way a leatherback is dark. Which means that from above, against that white floor, it was a shadow with edges, and they did not come ashore to nest. Newborn mosasaurs turn up in deep water chalk, hundreds of miles from any coastline. They gave birth in open ocean, alive, tail first, in the middle of nowhere. And the young were on their own from the first minute. Everything about this animal says the same thing. It did not visit the sea. It had lost the ability to leave. We know what these animals ate. And we know it with an unusual kind of certainty. Not from tooth marks. Not from inference. From stomachs. In 1918, a fossil hunter named Charles Sternberg pulled a 29-foot Tylosaurus out of the Kansas chalk. Inside the rib cage, where the gut had been, were bones that did not belong to it, a plesiosaur. Partially digested, the surfaces etched by acid. Then, through a chain of small publishing accidents, the discovery vanished. Nobody followed it up for over 80 years. Until a researcher went back through the old records and realized what had been sitting there the entire time. That one rib cage settled an argument the field had been having for generations. Mosasaurs killed plesiosaurs, not as scavengers picking at something already dead. The acid etching says that meal went down only hours before the predator itself died. But the specimen that tells the real story came out of South Dakota. Inside a single adult Tylosaurus, researchers found 4 separate animals. Take them one at a time, because each one is a completely different hunt. The first is a bony fish. That one is simple. A strike up into a shoal from below, the shoal detonating outward in every direction. One fish gone. The second is a shark. Identified from the teeth, because teeth are what survive. Read that one carefully. This was not a predator eating prey. This was a predator eating another predator, and coming out of the exchange with nothing to show for it but a full stomach. The third is a seabird, Hesperornis, which lived at the surface and only went under to feed. So this kill happened up in the light. The bird floating. The shadow rising underneath it. The strike coming vertically out of water it could not see into. And the fourth is a smaller Mosasaur. 6 feet of its own kind. Swallowed whole. Now put all 4 together. Because that list is not a menu. It is a census. Everything that lived in that sea is inside one gut. Fish from the shoals. Sharks from the midwater. Birds off the surface. Its own family from below. 4 entire levels of a food web, compressed into what may have been a single day of hunting. There is no specialization here. No niche. This animal treated an entire ecosystem as one continuous food source and moved through it, taking whatever was closest, and it never chewed. Not once. The jaw was not built for it, only to grip, reposition, and swallow. A python taking a deer, except in 3 dimensions, in open water, at the size of a school bus. That is the picture we had for 100 years. A generalist. An eating machine with no natural enemy in 2,000 miles of ocean, except that last part is not true. There was one thing in that sea that could hurt a full-grown Tylosaurus. There is a skeleton in Dallas that proves it. And it is missing its face. Here is the problem with 150 years of certainty. The first Tylosaurus was named in the 1860s, out of Kansas chalk. It was called Tylosaurus proriger, the prow-bearing knob lizard, and for a very long time it was the largest marine reptile known from North America. Around 30 feet. Formidable. Famous. So when new giant knob lizards came out of the rock, they went into the same box. That is how classification works when you only have one option available. Big Tylosaurus, American Cretaceous rock, equals proriger. It was written on labels in Kansas, in Connecticut, in New York, in Texas. For over a century, nobody seriously questioned it. Then, in the 2020s, a graduate student pulled out a specimen that had been filed that way and looked at it properly. The proportions were off. It was too large, and the teeth carried serrations. Fine. Saw-like ridges running the length of the cutting edge, which is not a normal Tylosaurus trait at all, so she went back to the original. The name-bearing specimen. The one described 150 years earlier, still sitting in a collection in Massachusetts. They did not match. That single comparison opened a door, and behind it were more than a dozen skeletons hiding in plain sight across North America. Every one of them large. Every one of them serrated. Every one of them carrying a name that belonged to a different animal. Then came the pattern that made it undeniable. The true proriger material was overwhelmingly from Kansas, and it dated to around 84 million years ago. The serrated giants were overwhelmingly from North Texas, and they dated to around 80 million years ago, 4 million years apart, hundreds of miles apart. Different size class, different teeth, different muscle attachments on the skull and the neck. These were never the same species. They were never even contemporaries. And there is a coda to this, which is the part that stays with you. While digging through archives for something completely unrelated, the researcher found a letter written in the 1960s by a paleontologist named John Thurmond. Thurmond had looked at the Texas Tylosaurs decades earlier and noticed exactly the same thing. They were too big, and they were different. He had even sketched out a name for them. Sea Tyrant. He never published it. The insight sat in a drawer for 60 years while the wrong label stayed on the bones. In 2026, the animal finally got its name. Tylosaurus rex, king of the knob lizards. A name is just bookkeeping. What matters is what the anatomy is telling us. Start with the teeth. The serrations are the whole argument. A smooth, conical tooth is a grabbing tool. It punctures, it holds, it resists a thrashing animal trying to pull free. That is the standard Mosasaur design, and it works. The entire family ran on it for 30 million years. A serrated tooth does something else entirely. Serrations cut. They saw through flesh on the draw. They are the signature of an animal that does not simply swallow its prey, but removes pieces from it. That is the toolkit of a tyrannosaur, of a great white, of predators that habitually attack things too large to fit down the throat in one piece. Almost no mosasaur has them. This one did. Now add the skull. The bone surfaces where the jaw muscles anchored are enlarged. So are the attachment points running along the neck vertebrae. That combination, a heavier bite driven by a stronger neck, points to an animal built to hold, twist, and tear, rather than to snatch and gulp. Then add the size. The best material runs to 43 feet, with weight estimates in the range of 3 to 4 tons. The older species topped out around 30 feet. The largest great whites in the ocean today reach about 20, double a great white. In a sea where the bottom was never far away, the implication is uncomfortable, and the researchers said so plainly. Compared to its relatives, this was a meaner animal, and that changes what it could hunt. A swallowing predator has a hard ceiling. However wide the throat opens, that is the largest thing it can ever eat. Every meal has to fit. A cutting predator has no ceiling at all. If you can remove pieces, size stops being a limit. You are no longer restricted to prey smaller than yourself. You can attack something exactly as big as you are. That is what serrations mean. Not a better grip. Not a faster kill. Permission. Permission to go after animals a normal mosasaur would have had to swim away from. Which raises the obvious question. In an ecosystem where a full-grown adult could swallow a shark, a plesiosaur, and a smaller mosasaur, where nothing else in 2,000 miles of open water came anywhere near its size, what, exactly, was all of that built for? In 1979, a skeleton came out of the ground east of Dallas. It has a nickname, the Black Knight. And it is the answer to that question. It is enormous, one of the largest of its kind ever recovered. But that is not what stops you. The tip of its snout is gone, not broken after death, not lost in the rock. Gone, sheared off the front of the face, taking the bony ram with it. And the lower jaw is fractured through. Now, here is the part that changes the story. Those injuries healed. The bone grew back over the wounds. Rounded, remodeled, sealed. This animal did not die from them. It took a hit that removed the front of its own face, and it kept swimming. It kept hunting. So what does that to a 43-foot apex predator? Nothing else in that sea had the mass or the reach to shear the front off a skull that size. To break that jaw, you would need jaws just as big. It was another one of its own kind. Picture it. The fossils give us enough to build it honestly. 2 animals, each longer than a school bus, each carrying a solid bony ram on the front of the face, and a neck engineered to drive it. They meet in open, sunlit water over a pale chalk bottom, with nowhere for either one to go. They do not circle. Mosasaurs were ambush accelerators, not distance fighters. Whatever happened here happened in seconds. The first impact comes in from the side. Not a bite, a ram. Solid bone driven into the flank with 40 feet of muscle behind it. The water compresses. Something in the rib cage gives. Then the jaws close. Not on the body, on the head, because the head is where the wounds are. Serrated teeth locked across the face of another giant. Both animals rolling, twisting, driving each other down toward the floor. And the floor is chalk. Soft, fine, white. It comes up around them in a cloud. But for a moment, there is nothing to see at all. When it clears, one of them is swimming away with the front of its face gone. And this is not an isolated case. That is the finding that matters most. Across the specimens assigned to this species, researchers documented injuries like this at a level not seen in any other Tylosaurus. A pattern of violence turned inward, over and over again. We have seen this before. In an animal, on land. Face-biting scars are one of the signatures of Tyrannosaurus rex. Two enormous predators, separated by an ocean and by millions of years, converging on the same behavior, turning the most powerful weapon they had on the only thing large enough to matter. That parallel is not an accident. It is written directly into the name, and it tells you what apex really means. Not safety. Not peace at the top of the chain. When an animal grows so large that nothing in its world can threaten it, the threat does not disappear. It just becomes the animal itself. There is a final piece to this, and it is the one that gets missed. Tylosaurus rex lived roughly 80 million years ago. Tyrannosaurus rex, the one everybody knows, appears around 68 million years ago, 12 to 13 million years apart. The two kings never shared a world. The Sea King was already gone, already extinct, already fossilizing in Texas mud, before the Land King ever took a single step, and the sea went with him. The Western Interior Seaway did not survive the Cretaceous. The continent rose, the water drained north and south, and the ocean that had split North America in half simply stopped existing. The shoals went, the plesiosaurs went, the diving birds went. Everything in that stomach from South Dakota. The fish, the shark, the seabird, the smaller Mosasaur. Every one of those lineages ended. Kansas dried into wheat. Texas dried into scrub. And the largest predator that ever ruled American waters became a layer of chalk with bones in it. Waiting 150 years for someone to read the label and notice it was wrong, that is the thing worth sitting with. This animal was not found in some remote field site. It was already collected, already numbered, already on display, in some cases, for over a century. And still nobody knew what they were looking at, which raises a question none of us can answer. How many more are there? How many kings are sitting under the wrong name right now? On a shelf, fully excavated, completely unrecognized? If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. Primeval Blue posts new files on the ancient ocean 3 times a week. And this seaway has more monsters in it than we could fit into one video. Tell me in the comments. If 2 of these met in open water, and both were full grown, and neither one backed down, who do you think swims away? Next file, we go deeper. And we go colder. The water is not finished with us yet.